An outrageous opportunity for investors. This 25 cent a share company has a 70-cent price target from Euro Pacific Capital. One of Idaho's most successful businessmen and his family own 35% of the company. Learn about this investment idea at futuremoneytrends.com/wealth. Greetings and thank you for joining us at futuremoneytrends.com. I have a real special guest with us today. He is responsible for awakening millions of people, both with his very limited government approach, free market thinking, so libertarian ideals, as well as the amazing approach he has towards looking at the economy out of the box, unconventional. Really made big waves with his book, Crash Proof, that came out in 2007. He's since gone on to start bullion companies, mutual funds, specialized private placement groups within his own company. Peter Schiff of Euro Pacific Capital. He is the CEO and president. And really, he needs no introduction because he has done so much good work for investors looking for the truth about the economy and about what's really going on behind our government politics and actions and interventions, daily interventions into our economy. Peter Schiff, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Thanks for stopping by. Well, first of all, in 2007, when I read your book, it was perfect. It woke me up. I went out and I was concerned about the economy, and I was, kind of buying some extra food and gold and silver and mining stocks. People who just read your book maybe 6 months ago or 2 years ago, basically people who get it. They're like, okay, there's inflation, they're printing too much, they're borrowing too much. Then all they want to do is they just want to protect themselves and preserve their wealth. And it's been rough, with gold and silver the last year and a half, as well as the mining stocks. What's your overall assessment of the whole situation with the economy? I mean, here's this QE3, QE4, and it's kind of the opposite of what you thought, or at least I think what I would have thought would have happened.
Well, no, I don't think the opposite is happening. I mean, yeah, gold went down this year, and so I expected it to go up. But I think what's happening is pretty much what we would anticipate. I don't see from the data any real economic recovery, certainly not in the United States. We are spending more money, but it's not because we're generating more wealth. We're just generating more debt. And we're using that borrowed money to consume. And so temporarily, it feels like we're wealthier because we get to spend all that money, but we have to come to terms with paying the bill. The bills are going to come due. Right now, interest rates are being kept at zero, which makes it possible to service the debt. Even though it's impossible to repay it, at least we can service it. But once interest rates go up, then we can't even service it, let alone repay it. And then the party's going to come to an end.
I know you advocate foreign stocks, but what about some of these big blue chips that are just, like a Walmart or an Intel, something where no one's ever going to be number one. That's their spot, or Coke.
Well, I don't like, a stock like a Walmart. The problem with those type of stocks is they're retailing to the U.S. consumer, and I think the U.S. consumer is tapped out. And to the extent that consumers are trading down and trying to get the best value they can because they're broke and they're really shopping for value, Walmart does well because they can provide that. But at some point, when the dollar really takes a dump and the Chinese pull the plug on it, walking into Walmart's going to be like walking into Neiman Marcus. The prices are going to be so high, their customers are going to be priced out of their own market. So I think that the days of American shopping are going to come to an end. We're just broke. Right now we're shopping because we can borrow, but our ability to do that's going to come to an end. And when the dollar goes down, how do we pay? How do we buy all the things that Walmart has on the shelves? We export dollars. We don't actually make anything of value. We just exchange pieces of paper that we print for the goods that other people produce. But production of goods requires real resources, labor, capital. All we do is run money off a printing press. And so we're taking the world for a ride, but eventually it's going to come to an end. And so I wouldn't want to be in a stock like Walmart or any retailers, or but you mentioned something like a Coca-Cola, or would you mention Intel? At least those companies have a global brand, a global presence. They export, and so to the extent that you're going to be in U.S. stocks, those are the kinds of stocks you want. And you might want to focus more on resource type companies. You could get into like a Chevron or oil. Not that I'm recommending any individual stocks. I'm not, because I can't do that. But I'm just talking in general about the types of stocks that you'd want to own. Companies that have real assets, that own resources, commodities that they can export. Because I do think a big change that we're going to see is going to be the emerging markets will emerge, and you'll have these enormous middle classes that will, basically rise to replace the collapse of the U.S. middle class, because they're going to gain the purchasing power that we lose. When the dollar goes down relative to currencies, that means other currencies are going up. And so people are going to gain the purchasing power that Americans lose. So try to find the Walmart, of China. Not the Walmart of America. If you're looking to participate in a retailer, find a company that's going to retail to a customer that can actually afford to buy stuff. Not Americans who are too broke because they've already bought too much.
Now, what about like a dividend? So like if you get a natural gas or an oil play in the United States, solid company, we don't have to name one, but it pays a dividend. Should you be concerned that your dividend is in U.S. dollars and their customers are still their customers are in the United States, but they're still a resource?
Well, if they're customers in the United States, that's problematic. But if they have the ability, and there's a big difference there between, let's say, an oil company and a gas company. The oil producers can sell everywhere. The gas producers are kind of limited to where they can sell. And so, you want to own the companies that can more easily tap into demand from Asia, not ones that are restricted to more local demand. But the key is not so much what currency your stock is traded in. I mean, where it's listed. It's where are the earnings coming from. And as long as they're earning foreign currencies, even if it's an American company, but their earnings are coming in from abroad, or they have commodities that they can sell to foreign consumers, then they're going to have higher earnings in whatever, in your depreciating U.S. dollars. So they'll be able to increase that dividend dramatically to offset the effects of the weak dollar and inflation. The only concern that I have for owning an American company, and it's one of the reasons that I prefer to own foreign companies, is that I'm afraid that as things really get bad in America and politicians look to vilify the rich and the corporations because they're an easy target, they might really jack up the corporate tax. They might have windfall profit taxes on companies that are seen profiting as everybody else suffers. So if you own a resource company in America, maybe it's an oil company, and the price of oil is $200 a barrel, $300 a barrel, people are paying $20 a gallon for gas, don't you think the oil companies will be easy targets for how dare they profit while we're all suffering? Let's, take those profits for the people, and they jack, so you can have these confiscatory types of taxes that I don't think other countries would impose. So I think that, I think it's safer to own businesses outside the U.S., particularly in countries that I think whose economies are going to be doing well, whose currency is going to be appreciating, because there's less pressure on politicians to take those kind of draconian, measures. It's usually when there's an economic crisis, when things are bad, that politicians do that kind of thing. That they're willing to steal, because people will tolerate more. The harsher the environment is, the more people turn to government, unfortunately, for a solution, and they're willing to give up their liberty and their freedom in exchange for whatever temporary, comfort is promised by the government. So I think it's dangerous to own assets in a country that is really, in the middle of an economic collapse.
Conventional wisdom says to have cash for safety and bonds for income. For people who read your book and they need safety, what do you think is safe, and what do you think is like for these income people who need income? Where do they go?
The conventional wisdom is completely wrong, as it normally is. There's nothing safe, in my opinion, about dollars or bonds. I mean, in fact, the only thing that's more dangerous than holding dollars is holding bonds denominated in dollars, because there not only don't you have a dollar, you just have the promise to be paid a dollar in the future. Well, the dollar will be worth less in the future than it is today. Bonds are a huge bubble. They are going to pop. I think the biggest risk is being taken by the bondholder. And in fact, if you look at central banks around the world, not just in America, inflation is their policy goal. Everybody wants inflation. If inflation isn't high enough, they panic. They think we need more of it. What inflation does, among a number of things, but one of the key things it does is it transfers wealth from savers to debtors. Because if whenever you have a loan, there's two sides of that transaction. There's the borrower and there's the lender. Well, inflation means that the lender can repay the borrower in money that has less value than the money he borrowed. So that's a gain to the debtor. It's a loss to the lender. Now, the biggest debtors in the world are the governments, and they control the printing presses. So if they're going to pursue a monetary policy, we wouldn't expect them to pursue a policy that benefits creditors, because they're not creditors. They're pursuing policies that benefit debtors. Plus, a lot of American voters, the typical American, is loaded up with debt. He's got a mortgage, he's got a car loan, he's got credit card debt, he's got student loans. So the government wants to wipe all this debt out. So there's no safety in owning the other side of that trade. If you own the dollars, you're the one that's getting wiped out. When the government inflates their debt away, they inflate away your asset, if your asset is that debt. So there's no safety. I think people that are sitting on significant bond portfolios have got to act quickly. They've got to understand that you can't clip these low coupons, and when interest rates go up, it's a double whammy, because not only are you losing money to inflation, but the bond is going to collapse. If you try to cash it in before maturity, you're going to have a huge penalty. The bond is going to trade at a big discount to its face value. So people need to get out now before the music stops and the bubble bursts, and look towards other ways to secure income. And plus, the yields are so low anyway, the income is not even decent. But if you go and look at stocks around the world and collect dividends instead of clipping coupons, there are a lot of stocks, and we put together income portfolios at Your Pacific Capital. People are collecting 6, 7, 8, 9% dividends in foreign currencies on foreign stocks. I would much rather get my income as an owner of a real asset collecting a dividend check, where the dividends can go up as a result of inflation, because the companies can just raise their prices if governments debase their money. That's what I want to own. I don't want to own a debt. And in fact, some of these companies have debt on their balance sheets, and so inflation benefits those corporations because it transfers wealth from the bondholders to the stockholders.
Is there any risk issue in the actually of buying a stock? A lot of people are just buying physical precious metals because they're scared that there's going to be some type of financial event where everybody gets screwed, basically, who owns stocks. The stock market's default.
Well, there's always risk in buying stocks. And it's greater in some stocks than others. You have to understand the company.
Not in the individual companies, but actually owning a stock. Is there risk in actually holding some money in the stock market itself?
Well, meaning that you're just going to lose your certificate or lose your ownership?
Like the MF Global people, where you actually lose your ownership.
Well, that was because of their accounts. They were in these margin accounts and trading futures. And the company had loaned out the money. So I don't know how great that risk is or how to gauge it. Certainly if you don't have a margin account, if you have a cash account at a brokerage firm, and there's usually not even certificates anymore. Everything is book entry form. People can think, well, can the computer lose my name and they won't remember that I own this stock? I don't know how great that risk is. I don't even know how to try to quantify it. I think that the risk that is more understandable and more realistic is just the risk in the purchasing power of the dollar. The risk that there's just inflation, that the dollar loses value. And I think that stocks represent, in general, not all stocks, but is a good way to hedge against inflation. Whether it's the best way or not, it depends on the stocks. But it's bonds. It's people that are holding on, even currencies. Even if you have money in your mattress, it's not safe. It doesn't matter. Yeah, the money might, theoretically, no one is going to steal the money maybe, and so when you reach under your mattress, your money is still there. But then you go to spend it and you can't buy anything. And so what good is your money if you can't buy anything with it, or you can't buy very much with it relative to what you could originally buy when you stuffed it under the mattress in the first place? So people have to stop worrying about losing their money and start focusing on their money losing value, because I think that is going to happen for sure. And so that totally changes the dynamic. The conventional wisdom, if you're a conservative investor, you can't buy bonds. You can't buy CDs because you're not going to conserve anything that way.
Yeah.
Because your money's not going to conserve its purchasing power, and that's what you want to conserve.
How long can this play out? Because people like Ron Paul, everybody respects him. He's a great man. But he's been warning about this since the 70s.
Well, he's been right since the 70s.
But it hasn't collapsed, and there hasn't been a dollar crisis.
But it's a process. And if you look at where the dollar was in the early 70s, it was much higher than it is today against other currencies. Back in 1970, you can get 4 Swiss francs, 5 Swiss francs for the dollar. Now it's 1. To say that the dollar hasn't gone down during the period of time where Ron Paul's been warning about it. And also, if you look at what's happened to America. When Ron Paul was making these warnings, America was the richest creditor nation. Now we're the biggest debtor nation. We've gone, we were wealthy, now we're basically broke. We're living off of debt. So we've had a huge transformation of the American economy. And look at all the Americans now on food stamps, on disability, on unemployment. I mean, the whole economy has imploded. It just hasn't, the bottom hasn't dropped out yet, because we're able to go deeper into debt. But the collapse is coming.
Do you think it could be a long transition where the middle class just goes away?
Well, it's been shrinking and shrinking. I mean, what it means to be a middle class today, a middle class America in the 1950s, if you were middle class, if you were married, your wife didn't have a job. She didn't have to. You can afford to support her. Middle class, blue collar jobs, no college degree, no high school degree, and your wife didn't work. And you probably had 2, 3, 4 kids, and you didn't have any credit card debt. And you had savings for your retirement. Today, what's middle class now? I mean, both your parents are struggling. Maybe your father has 2 jobs and your mother has 1. What's that family? Nobody has any savings. In fact, parents, by the time they can afford to get married because they have so much student debt, they can only have 1 kid, and look at how much it costs to send them to college. So I think, I read a statistic, I think the average American has less than $5,000 net worth. I mean, it's pathetic. So we're basically broke. And in fact, it's much less, because if you actually took the national debt and broke it down per capita, the average American has a negative net worth, because the government has borrowed in his name more than whatever he's managed to save. So we're completely insolvent. So we've had this gigantic transformation, and it's unfortunate that people didn't listen to people like Ron Paul, because he was saying the right thing. We should have changed course a long time ago. He recognized the destructive path that we were on, yet we just kept moving on that path. And now we're going to have a crisis. There are always going to be people that are going to say, well, you're a stop clock. You just, you keep predicting doom and eventually it happens. But you have to go back and listen to why. If somebody just says, we're going to collapse, yeah, I mean, but the question is, why are they saying it? You got to go back and look. And if you look at the things that I've said and look at the things that Ron Paul said, this is why it's happening. We're actually getting this. It's not like we're just saying negative things to be negative, and then when something negative happens, we can claim credit for predicting it. We're not just saying what's going to happen. We're saying why it's going to happen and how it's going to happen. And if you look back at the events, I think it bears out that we're right. And it's not, just us. There are other people that understood it. Unfortunately, our opinions are in the minority. And you have governments that have a vested interest in ignoring these opinions because they don't want to change, because they're at the root cause of the problem. But they don't want to acknowledge their role in creating the problem. They don't want to acknowledge that the problem is more government and that we need less government, because that's not how they get elected. That's not how they stay in power. They promise something for nothing. They promise that government is the solution to your problems, not the cause of your problems. So they're never going to acknowledge people like Ron Paul for what they're saying. But they'll try to discredit you by saying, well, you've been saying this for years and nothing bad has happened. I mean, look around. A lot of bad stuff has happened. We just haven't had the final complete collapse. But what good is it when that happens? Now it's too late to do anything about it. At least if you would listen to Ron Paul and do something before you have that complete implosion, but to wait for it to happen, that is too late.
In closing, Peter, on the lighter side, I know a lot of fans would love to ask you this, so I'm going to ask you this. Do you ever get really frustrated with these idiots on CNBC and all these people? I mean, I literally, the way I watch your videos is I fast forward through everyone else talking, and I just listen to you because I can't even deal with it anymore. It's so frustrating.
Yeah, sometimes I do. Sometimes I get a kick out of it. I mean, what frustrates me, though, is that I don't actually get on as often as I used to. I used to get more airtime and better times on CNBC, Fox, CNN, Bloomberg. Many of these networks don't even have me on, haven't had me on in 4 or 5 years. But from 2005 to 2008, they had me on all the time. And I was saying all this stuff, and they were still making fun of me. But it seems like once I got more credibility, because a lot of the things that I said happened, I wasn't getting invited on anymore. and because it's harder for them to make fun of me. And I think it also reminds them about how wrong they were. How many people were saying how great everything was, and they don't like me coming on and reminding them how much they got it wrong. I actually get a little bit more foreign television now than I used to. I never used to do, but now I do more like CNBC Asia, China TV, Russia TV. So I seem to get invited now on internationally, whereas before 2008, I never got invited to be on these international programs. But now they've really scaled back. I mean, I haven't been on CNN in years. I used to be on all the time. And if you go back to the old archives, I finally got to be on. No, I was on CNN. I got to be on that one show on CNN. In fact, it's an interesting interview too. What's the guy's name? Farad Zakaria,
GPS or something.
Yeah, and you can actually see that one. It's on YouTube. It's got over 100,000 views. But it was me and 3 or 4 liberals sitting around a table, and everybody was arguing with me, including the host.
Yeah.
But I thought it was. But then they haven't invited me on again since. I don't know. Somehow I got on that show. But I have a hard time. I think given the things that I've said and what's happened, you figured I'd have a little bit more credibility, and they'd want to have me on a little bit more in some of these mainstream shows. They seem to have, what's his name on a lot? The other doctor, Amiro Rubini.
Oh, yeah.
But he was hardly on at all. I never even saw him on television before 2008. But now after the crisis, he's on all the time. And I think the reason the media likes him is because he wants more government. He blames the crisis on, he wants the stimulus, he wants the bailouts, and so he's a bear that they like. Even though he got a lot of stuff wrong, actually, Rubini. I think that my forecasts were a lot better prior to the crash, and I think since the crash, because he's been very bearish on the stock market. And the stock market's gone up. I've been saying, look, the stock market, I haven't been bearish on stocks. I've been bearish on the dollar. I've been bearish on paper.
Yeah.
And so I think I have a better understanding. I think the media finds his bearishness more palatable than mine, because his solutions are about government and mine are about freedom. Mine are about limited government, sound money. And I think the establishment has a hard time wrapping their arms around that.
That's a good point. We are going through hard times. As far as your success as an individual, what are some things you might attribute your success to that could help others who are also, trying to live life, trying to have a great life during these times?
I don't know, just as far as success in business you're talking about?
Yeah, success in business. Any advice for people who are younger building
it's tough.
Right now?
I know I used to say this when I ran in the Senate, but the business that I have, my main business, and I've got several now, but the main one, Europe Pacific Capital, is a company that I started in the mid-1990s. I was in my 30s, I guess, early 30s. But I couldn't do it today. It's impossible because of the government rules and regulations that exist now that didn't exist then. I couldn't have afforded it. I used to do all the compliance myself. And now it's impossible. So the government has raised the bar, at least in that industry. Yeah. But the advice that I think I have is, you just got to be persistent. You got to work hard. When I started my business, I went a couple of years without a paycheck. And I could have made money if I stayed at Shearson Lehman. I could have earned that money, but I sacrificed the short term because I believed in building something of my own. And so you've got to underconsume. There were a lot of things I didn't have that I could have bought, because I made a little bit of money and I saved it. And then I used the savings to kind of finance several years of not earning any money. But it's the fact that I underconsumed and lived beneath my means. And then you take a chance, and then you work hard, and you work. I used to get into my office, in California. I'd get in at 6 in the morning, and I didn't leave until 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night. You work long hours, you worked weekends, and you just got to work hard. You got to believe in what you're doing, and be persistent. Stick to what you believe in, and you can succeed. It's harder now than it used to be because there's more government that you have to overcome. It's not impossible, but there are a lot of people that are looking for a steady job. They're looking for an easy way out. You're never going to make anything if you just want to show up and do what you're told and collect a paycheck. You've got to make things happen on your own. You got to be the one that writes the paychecks. And it's a lot harder to do that.
Advice,
But the thing is, and you've got the way the left looks at it now, and trying to vilify the entrepreneur. I have well over 100 employees now, and I've got companies in Canada. I've got a bank in the Caribbean. I've got a metals company. I've got an entertainment company, a media company. I employ all sorts of people. But it all started from my own individual desire to make money for myself.
Yeah. And
to try to start something for myself. I wasn't just trying to be an altruist. I wasn't trying to create jobs. I've got, satisfied customers. I think I've influenced the lives of a lot of people who have read my books. But why do you do all this? It's all, motivation for myself.
Yeah.
And instead of, the Obama, oh, this, you didn't build that, you didn't do that, let's, give something back. Entrepreneurs don't have to give anything back. They didn't take anything out. Nobody ever gave me anything, right, that I didn't earn. But in the process, and it's not just me, and it's every other entrepreneur, you satisfy the desires of your customers. In my case, it's people who need financial advice, but other people, are building products and other services. But you satisfy desires from your customers. You create jobs for your employees. You do pay taxes along the way. But you generate a lot of wealth. And, we need to glorify that. And those are the heroes. I'm not saying necessarily just me, but there are plenty of other people that are far more heroic, that have done far more than I have, that have created much more in the way of goods and services, that have employed, many more people than me. But the reason they did it was because they wanted to enrich themselves.
Yeah.
And they worked hard, and they ended up enriching society far more collectively than they enriched themselves individually. But you got to work, and as I said, it's savings. If I just spent everything that I earned, like the government wants you to do, and ran up credit card debt, I never could have started my company. How could I start my company if I had to pay credit card bills, or if I had student loans to be paid? If I couldn't have survived if I had to pay student loans.
Yeah.
But the government punishes you now if you're saving. You're doing it wrong. They want you to go out and buy and stuff. So we've created an economy that really can't work right now. But as your initial question, for any one individual, sure. You can still succeed. You just got to try harder, and the bar is harder. So people that might otherwise have succeeded are going to fail because of government. If there was less government, it would be easier for more people to succeed.
That's great advice. Thank you so much, Peter.